Hello and welcome to episode 68 of the War Report. We are here for another week, even though it's been actually 5 days. We were a little late last week's episode, but whatever. We got quite the news this week for you, and let's jump right into it, starting with a little bit of news on none other than the great Dragon of the East, China.
Do you want me to go over this?
Yes.
All right. So the Chinese and Hong Kong protests are still going on. Um, just so you know, these protests started pretty much in February, and it's kicked off from this extradition bill that the Chinese mainland government had passed. Now, it seems kind of innocuous, but the reason why this was such a big deal was when Hong Kong became, given back to China, so to speak, in a quasi-sovereign state. Part of the deal was that Hong Kong criminals would not be extradited to China. And so the protests began in February when this bill was presented that would essentially allow this. And it would essentially, uh, disregard this sort of independent court system that Hong Kong has, that has been in place since 1997. And so a few months later, we know that the bill was pretty much put off the table. So the protests are still going on despite the fact that this extradition bill is no longer really an issue in China. They've decided they're not going to vote on it right now. And so the main protesters, it went from anti-extradition bill to just straight up autonomy now. So they got what they wanted, and yet it wasn't enough. And so here you see where the Chinese government is going to start cracking down and have been cracking down. And it's gotten pretty intense. I mean, there was uh, a Chinese British official. He was a member of the British consulate, their trade team in Hong Kong. His name was Simon Chang. He's 28 years old, and he's been detained by the Chinese police. And his family are claiming that he's pretty much being held against his will without access to any Chinese or British attorneys. And so it's definitely this is probably the most highest ranking official on the sort of pro-protest side that has been arrested now. Obviously, the main figurehead of the protesters is the individual, the Lam, who is a who is also a Chinese government official, but she's the pro-democracy person. So that's essentially who is the figurehead right now. But there is a current British official under arrest right now.
Hmm. Stepping it up, I guess. I can say I would not have expected this, even with the growing tensions. And yeah, I'm throwing a bit through a loop on that one, but continuing on what you said, I had one bit of additional information to add to the Hong Kong story. So, now this is from Southfront. China is warning Trump it won't make trade concessions if the U.S., quote, plays the Hong Kong card. So, what China is saying is pretty straightforward. Look, you want a trade deal, back off the Hong Kong issue, which is what I've been saying for past month or so now since we've been talking about this. It's not our problem. Let what happens there happen. Let's just focus on making a trade agreement.
Yeah, and to this end too, did China not state today that they wouldn't be buying Venezuelan oil anymore? Um, so I'm guessing the spotlight is going to go back to Venezuela in a week or two. I don't think for a second that Western involvement uh, in the Hong Kong protests just pivots around China buying oil from Venezuela, because it gets a lot more of its oil from Iran than it does from Venezuela. But it's also interesting to note how, the extradition bill was at the heart of the protests from the beginning. And then, there was also, statements from the protests, were also about housing, because, Hong Kong is arguably the most expensive city to live in. and is the city in Asia. And there's not really affordable housing. So, that was part of it. But it's very interesting how you pointed this out, Perseus, that it's now escalated to we want autonomy. We want to go back to the, to Western rule, which is not going to happen. I mean, I think America is using this as a pivot point against China. They can make it painful for China, and that's why they're doing it. I don't think they have any intention of wresting Hong Kong away from China, and it wouldn't be possible anyways.
Mm-hmm. And this isn't the first time these types of protests have happened. I mean, 5 years ago, there were also massive protests, which was known as the Umbrella Movement, which was taking place sort of at the tail end of the color revolutions and Arab Springs. And so there's this sort of debate going on amongst like MAGA Twitter. Is this CIA or is this, or should we back Hong Kong against the evil Chinese, the evil Chinese who run Hollywood? And so, honestly, I think when you see these sort of, anti-government movements against American enemies, you have to know that no matter what organic element there is or may have been at the root, the CIA just takes over whatever's going on. They'll come in with more money, with more resources, with more manpower, and they'll just take away whatever organic movement's going on. And we already know the CIA is involved in China with the Uyghurs, who are on the sort of the west end of the China, where closer to like Central Asia. But you hear claims of concentration camps in China of Muslims. But countries like Iran deny that this is actually going on because they know the CIA trains weird populations into doing their bidding. So it's not hard to see why the U.S. or the CIA would see this as a beneficial or an opportunistic moment. Will it actually amount to anything? No. Will it actually overthrow China? No. I think we're going to see this end the same way the 2014 one. And where it just sort of dies out after a few weeks. I mean, look at the Yellow Vest protest. I mean, that went on for so long, and it hardly changed anything, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, and it's still going, but it's over. Like, I mean, as a protest movement, it's over.
Well, I understand where you're coming from.
46 weeks now.
Yeah. 46. But I understand where you're coming from with that, but I would say maybe as winter, November rolls back around, if Macron makes another gaffe or makes another dumb decision, these could very well spark right back up, but I generally agree with you.
Mm-hmm. Last note on this, over the weekend, Twitter suspended 200,000 accounts that they accused of being essentially Chinese bots for the People's Republic. And Facebook ultimately did a similar thing. And so it's an interesting social media war going on too. I mean, on the one hand, they actively accuse Russia of interfering. And so now we're seeing Chinese interference accusations.
That's actually important considering where companies like Google and Apple and so on lie with China. You could well imagine that if Hillary were elected, that there would be much more hesitancy to do something like that.
Yeah, Google and Facebook are behind China's Great Firewall, just so the audience knows, meaning they're basically censored from the state.
Right. And because you don't see this kind of action you didn't see this kind of action taking place in 2014 during the umbrella protests, right? I'm hesitant to say that they're doing this basically to either side with Trump or like, but I do think it's really important because I think they too now sense that with Hillary not getting elected, with the trade agreement that they had prior, I think what was it, the TIP?
Yes. Yeah.
right? Since that's scrapped, you're seeing them more or less, maybe for different reasons, maybe for similar reasons, being on the side of Trump's administration, or whatever deep state is at. But like, that's, I think, an important thing that has developed in the last 5 years, and especially accelerated this year. So that's interesting to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's part of that, you know, this new online warfare, the sort of asymmetrical warfare that states are going through. I mean, even if Russia didn't actually hack the election to get Donald Trump elected, there is evidence that Russia was like promoting Black Lives Matter
Yeah.
accounts and like holding Black Lives Matter protests. So, I mean, they may have gotten the angle wrong, but the fact remains that there is this sort of social media war.
Yeah, a bunch of
Yeah, I mean,
Russian
Russia was
trolls.
going to play both sides all along. Sorry, go ahead, Constantine.
Yeah, a bunch of Russian trolls. I mean, we have one on the show right now. One of the many Macedonians they hired to push pro-Trump propaganda.
You're doxing me, bro. Yeah, yeah. I mean, my favorite Russian bot account was a Facebook account for large brown Indian women, and how they've been discriminated against for too long. And it had all the different kinds of saris, like extra size saris, and I kid you not, this was a real account. It had this Mother Earth vibe, like, to appeal to the wine, to wine,
yeah, that's
and
just the worst.
like, I'm like, tell me how you could have a more fun job than to be a Russian bot. I'll wait. Can you imagine creating an account like that to destabilize the United States? That's hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, and look at the other end. Look at what the U.S. trolls have to do in foreign countries. Look at the dumb things we have to promote. Like, is the Russian intelligence? They get all the fun stuff.
Yeah, I know. The CIA gets like pro homosexuality
Yeah. Feminism in
for
Iran is
Botswana.
cool.
Yeah. Trans kids in Afghanistan.
All right,
look
should
at
we
that,
move
another
on
gas
to
tech.
G7?
Sure.
Yes, and I can take the lead on this one if you want me to.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so with the upcoming G7 summit, President Donald Trump has renewed calls on Tuesday to readmit Russia into the organization ahead of the group summit in France this weekend. Now, he said, quote, "I think it's much more appropriate to have Russia, and it should be the G8, Trump says in the Oval Office. Now, the group, of course, was once the G8 and included the United States, Canada, the UK, France, Italy, Germany, Japan, and Russia, but became the G7 in 2014 after the annexation of Crimea. Now, Trump accused Obama of getting outsmarted by Putin, which led to him ousting from the committee. And he said, quote, "So I could certainly see it being the G8 again." Trump added, noting that the group frequently discusses issues concerning Russia. Now, as I mentioned before, the G8 will be hosted by Emmanuel Macron in Bizarre, France, over this weekend, August 24th, 26th. Now, of course, they meet yearly. Their summit last year was in Canada in June, which we got the excellent photo op with Merkel and Macron trying to corner Trump while Bolton and Abe are just standing behind him. And Conte, who we'll discuss later, is just kind of standing at the side wondering what's going on. That's the most famous scene from last G7, but I figured that was worth mentioning. So there is, of course, a bit of a
I remember that photo.
G7 as there was last year. So with the UK, of course, trying to leave the European Union, Italy cozying up to the UK-US alliance, France trying to step up the plate and be the alternative coalition with Germany. Now, this, of course, will result in Italy and the UK boosting trade ties with the US, while EU officials find a way to wriggle free from US dominance, such as trading with Iran or the unwillingness to open up its closely protected agricultural sector. Things we've been seeing going on for about the past year and a half or so. Now, this has been a sticking point between Trump and the EU, of course. Now, another sticking point between Trump and the EU is, of course, none other than NATO. Now, one of Trump's regular gripes with the European allies, particularly Germany, is the low defense outlays, and that means the U.S. has to bear the burden of the cost of protecting the continent. He also questioned the worth of NATO. Uh, he also questioned the worth of NATO pulled out of the nuclear treaty with Russia without consulting its allies in Europe. So, yeah, it's a bit of a disrespectful move from the, of course, European point of view. Now, in all, the U.S. has around 246 bases throughout Europe and more than 64,000 troops. So, just to put things in perspective there.
Yeah, so I don't think Macron is going to be successful in this G7. I mean, he's been trying to step up as being the alternative to Trump as the world leader. And the issue here going into G7 is sort of Salvini, his sort of rise to fame in the upcoming Brexit. Trump is sort of creating this, and we'll get to Italy and Salvini later, but he is creating a little coalition right now. He's trying to win over Hungary. He's trying to win over Poland against Germany and France. And so this, the G7 issue, it's going to be difficult for them to be able to have a consensus on any issue, whether Russia or Iran, if they're internally divided, perhaps bigger than ever. I mean, Obama was sort of a really big unifying factor with the EU and other U.S. Coalition partners. But with Trump, you see that there are these rifts that are worth exploiting from a multipolar point of view. But in terms of, is this going to help U.S. goals? I mean, not necessarily. As you can see, the U.S. is having a hard time getting European allies to help them police the Persian Gulf. And so, I mean, this can have grave effects ultimately on U.S. hegemony.
I would definitely agree. I like that you brought up Obama and how he was used as the unifying figure because I've been saying for a while now, Obama was the apex, the peak of the neoliberal world order. He was the perfect figurehead. He was the perfect imperial figurehead for this liberal empire. He, of course, had the minority points. He had a smooth talking, well spoken sort of thing. Could bring people from these coalitions together. Got along well with, especially the Western Europeans. And you bring up that the G7 ever since Trump has been a completely internally divided situation. Now these are supposed to be viewed as the now, it initially started out as this, but with the way things have shifted, it's not today. The seven largest economies in the world, but the point being, it's still seven major power players on the global stage. And if they can't even get along, as you were saying, from a multipolar point of view, that is a very good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think much is going to be accomplished by any side. Um, I think this what's happening is this process of drifting. I think we're seeing a drifting, say, between Britain and mainland Europe, America from Europe as well, and this is kind of an interim stage. I think we're going to see the fruits of this probably in the next 10 to 15 years, not right now, and probably not yet. We're not going to see a major uptick in this direction, but the direction will go on nonetheless. Even if Trump is not reelected, whether Russia is going to be included again, I find that doubtful. Only because I think with this drifting, as it were, these islands moving further and further away from one another, you have to wonder about the longevity of the G7 as well and what it means. And I think you're dead on about how Obama represents, the apex of the liberal order, post Fukuyama and so on. And the truth is as American influence and power, say from an economic and military point of view, tend to depreciate, or at least the cooperative element in all this. Europe, I think, will try to form as a kind of third position, literally, between Britain and America on one side and Russia on the other. Europe at the moment may not be contributing that much to NATO. However, I think part of the reason for that is again, it's part of this drifting, and that they're already, I think, working on plans for a post-American hegemonic order. It would be very easy for them, for instance, just to uptick everything by 1%. For many of the countries, that's doable, but they're not really doing it. They're not really invested in it, and I don't think even the talks of a European army are there. And I don't think they're there just to call Trump's bluff. I think they see a kind of trajectory taking place, and like Perseus brought up, the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, the way no countries are willing to participate in that except for Britain, it is, would have been, you never would have seen this in the 90s and in the 2000s.
Mhm.
So I apologize about the technical difficulties, and we're just going to pick right back up and talk about everyone's favorite subject, Syria.
All right, so yeah, let's get to Syria. There's been some really big news. So Assad and the Syrian forces were able to liberate Han Sheikhoun, which is one of the largest cities in the Idlib province. Remember, Idlib is the northwest province that ISIS and Turkey are kind of holding together. And this is pretty much the last region on the west side of Syria that needs to be liberated. And so the opposition fighters have withdrawn from that key town, Khan Sheikhoun, and have moved to other strongholds. Now, the withdrawal, like I said, has been from one of the largest towns, which has been in the hands of the rebels since 2014. So it's been a while since these people have been under Syrian rule. But a statement from the main group, which is holding the Idlib, the main rebel group, is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS. They describe this as a sort of redeployment. They're sort of rationalizing it as withdrawing to other more crucial areas. But the thing is that we know that's not true. Khan Sheikhoun is pretty much a key highway that connects Damascus to the northern city of Aleppo. So pretty much this was a key region between those 2 points that needed to be liberated for the government's perspective in order to be able to freely transfer, resources, goods, or trade or what have you. So that's pretty much the biggest news from Syria so far. Is the Idlib battle. It's slow. But it's happening piece by piece.
Well, I'm just telling you, if the same thing would have happened in 2017 and 2018, we would have seen another gas attack. But it's gotten to the point where even the most ardent anti-Assad forces in the West. I mean, when was the last time you even heard someone like a John Bolton or a Mike Pompeo talk about how we must contain Assad or we must hold him to account for X, Y, and Z? It's been dead in the water. Nobody's talked about it. What Lindsey Graham complained about Iran today on Twitter. That's the most we've gotten out of any of this for months.
Yeah, good point. Now all you're doing is hearing some NGOs basically complain about what's going on, but I think basically the narrative is broken. People realize that these areas are filled with jihadists, and that there's virtually nothing to separate them from what the West likes to believe rebels are. I don't think we should underestimate that. The impact that 2015 had with the attacks in Nice and the Bataclan in Paris. I mean, just to name a few, there were others. There was a couple in Germany as well. That you could look at it that, in fact, the beginning of the turning point also began, or these attacks played a role then, because the argument could be that for most normies, what's the advantage of prolonging this war, right? When this is the impact, and now arguably, Russia had barely begun to even help at that point. In fact, the attack in Nice, I don't even think Russia had actually, joined the war officially.
They were there for 2 months at that point. Russia joined September 15.
That's right. That's right.
And then that was in 2016. Paris was in November 2015. So
that's right.
Paris was like 2 months, and then they blew up that one airliner in Egypt that had like 200 something Russian passengers on it, and that's what really prompted Russia to step up the role beyond the very limited role they had even when they first entered.
Yeah. So I think that most people, like, it's not 2011. Everybody knows that these guys are jihadists. Like, too many of the gas attacks are no longer believable. The white helmets are discredited, and you can see that the more that they're discredited, the more the corporate entertainment industry, is backing them with the developers of Call of Duty.
The white helmets win an Oscar award.
Yeah, it's yes, you can see that, like, all of this is, like, typically, like, to use Constantine's term, during the height of the neoliberal order, right, you wouldn't have to go this far, right? You wouldn't. It isn't necessarily good in a liberal order to have the higher echelons really consistently, relentlessly push a certain line, right? That's supposed to happen. Like, you can't disturb the normie too much, is what I'm basically saying, right? And now you can see that this is like the last 2 years that's escalated, and people are still not buying it. So the magic has worn off. The narrative is dying, and people don't really care anymore, or so that's not working. The other thing is, the recent advances by the Syrian army. You can see they're in the sort of top northwestern area where they've captured that town. From the east, I'm pretty sure they're going to begin a push, and what that's going to do, that pincer movement will then isolate a huge pocket, which is filled with small towns. And you're going to see, I think, if things go well, by next week, you're going to see a big chunk of Idlib liberated. Also, I think interesting to note is that although Erdogan and Turkish forces are helping these these Turkmen or Turkish minority in northern Syria fight against Assad and Russia, you're also seeing Assad has begun shelling, like, actual, like, Turkish troops and Turkish-backed militias. Turkey's retaliated with F-16s and whatnot, but you're seeing a kind of boldness now emerging from the Syrians, and still no kind of conflict with South Stream 2 between Putin and Erdogan, right? Yeah, they're going to have this corridor, like, apparently, that's going to displace the Kurds. We'll see how that goes. But you're seeing a much more emboldened Syria and Russia, and you're not getting a hell of a lot of pushback. And primarily Turkey, because Turkey, I think, in Idlib is the most invested. But they're being awfully quiet, or at least Western media is not airing whatever concerns they have.
Man, what a shit situation for Syria. I mean, you're going to either have Kurds or Turks.
What's the difference?
Oh, no. I disavow.
It's enough for Erdogan to play everyone but the Kurds.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you almost get the sense that, like, Erdogan is maybe reaching a limit here. Or, like we discussed last show and the show before, actually, about how it's almost like two different struggles are happening, right? Or rather, two theaters. And one is the economic, and the other is, say, the military. With the case of Syria, and they're in contradiction of one another. But it's almost like the military is like this kind of crapshoot, a kind of like, well, we'll do this, and it's not necessarily pending how the war will turn out, but we'll wait and see, which seems, very odd. Like but that's fourth generational warfare.
Yeah, you can wage a war on somebody while shaking their hand.
Yeah, yeah, and make multi-billion-dollar deals and so on. So the war becomes this kind of theater. I mean, for Assad and for Syria, the war is not theater at all. Like, literally, if Assad had lost,
No.
he'd either have to take flight to Russia or like he'd be dead.
No, if Assad passes away, I mean, let's just say Assad has a heart attack, it's over.
Right.
Syria crumbles.
Yeah, very much so. Thank
And
God
his
he's a
wife has
doctor.
cancer. His wife has a it's not enough. His wife has cancer right now.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's true.
didn't his younger brother die like in 2013? On top of his older brother, who was supposed to become president, he died in the 90s. So, apparently, death surrounds his family. I'd be watching. I mean, granted, the Assad curse has had quite the record, but yeah, it seems like
No, Bashar.
yeah,
Bashar is an extremely honorable man. I mean, this is a man.
Yeah.
Him and his wife are British citizens. They're complete Westerners, doctors, educated in the West. They're just like us in many respects. And Assad never really had any plans of being a politician. Like his older brother was supposed to be the next in line, and then another brother was supposed to be, was more interested than he was. And so this was a situation that kind of fell on him, with his dad passing away, his brother passing away, the world power seeing that as an opportunity to invade Syria. I mean, what he did to run the country, and run shop on the world powers is extremely honorable.
Yeah.
A great life story.
In a way, it's a bit like Armenians with the Romans, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
to the West, he's a traitor, right? Because he was supposed to be part of the brain drain, and that was going to, he was. I'm sure they looked at him as an influencer on his family and the rest of Syria, right?
yeah. Remember when Hillary Clinton called him a reformer and like all that kind of stuff, and like praised him in the 2000s? Yeah, they thought he was gonna be one of them. They thought he was gonna join the quote unquote club, and I guess not.
Yeah, and in that respect, very similar to Putin. You have this rebellion, as it were, right? And Putin basically did the same thing. But Putin could never have done it without like a kind of like an inner circle of support to make sure that he is not like taken out, because Russia really was at the precipice of a collapse, and that what he was about to do to the West was going to form and did form instant enemies. Like that, what he instigated required like a very, like, to use the Russian word, a very solid druzhina around him, and he managed to do it, and Assad as well. That's I find that fascinating.
There's this interesting history of America's enemies being Western educated first. There
That's
was
true.
there's
So Khomeini too, right?
Khomeini,
Kim
Jong-un. Kim Jong-un, and there was also Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh he did college in France. So
No, F you, bitch.
yeah, Khomeini did spend time in England, and in Paris. I mean, there's this interesting phenomena in the early, 60s to 90s, when that sort of anti-colonialism was still kind of big in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That did happen a lot, but nowadays, the powers that are coming here to get educated are mostly Arabian and Chinese now.
Well, I'll take
and
this.
I don't see them going back to fight America. I don't see that.
I'll take it a step further. It reminds me of you'll get these like historical tidbits that get thrown around a lot. Is how in 1913 Hitler, Stalin, Lenin, Tito were all in Vienna.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
interesting. Yeah.
But
That is
I do have a
crazy.
little bit of breaking news that leads perfectly into the next topic. Australia has agreed to join the U.S.-led security mission in the Gulf.
Oh wow.
Australia stepping it up, and it kind of makes sense with their wanting nuclear weapons. The sort of with especially what's going on in the Southeast China Sea. I mean, Australia really is one of the few partners the U.S. has left, with Philippines, Indonesia, and all these other countries willing to work with China instead.
Yeah.
All right.
Hmm.
Well, I mean, we're talking about tankers, so let's just talk about the other tanker then. Because, I mean, the reason why this is all going on is because Iran has essentially made policing the Persian Gulf impossible. And one of their ships, if you remember a few weeks ago, or this was well, actually, yeah, it was a few weeks ago, it was headed to Syria around the Horn of Africa, and it got stopped in Spain, in Gibraltar.
Yeah,
It was,
Greece, I think.
yeah, exactly. That was released 2 days ago,
Yeah.
and it pretty much was headed immediately toward a Greek port, which caused the U.S. officials to issue a statement warning the Greeks that if they let the ship dock at any of their ports, that it would constitute material support for terrorism. So this was a very stern warning that the U.S. officials were making, and it was because after Spain and the Gibraltar officials they let the ship go, the U.S. tried to seize it, but it was denied by Gibraltar. And so it's pretty important to understand that right now the reason why that the Iranian tanker in the Mediterranean is big is because it is sending oil to Assad. Syria is under an oil shortage right now because all the oil fields are being run by the U.S. and ISIS on the east side of the country. So Iran has to fuel Syria basically, and one of the ways to do it is through these ships. Now, is the ship going to actually go all the way to Syria? It's possible the Syrian ships might just meet it halfway and they'll transfer the oil mid-sea. That has
Mhm.
happened before. It's also possible that Iran will just dock in Cyprus without Cyprus's consent, and this has happened as well before. This happened back in 2014. An Iranian boat that was sending weapons to Syria docked in Cyprus, and the Cyprus government officials seized the boat, and they mishandled the contents of the boat, and an accident led to the death of some of their officials.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the
I
Russians
remember
have
that.
a port leased out of Cyprus, so I mean, we have to take that into consideration if that's the
Mhm.
case.
Mhm.
And also, the Russians have been sending oil from Crimea to Tartus, so there's another
Mhm.
Yeah,
element to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, right now the boat is somewhere in the Med, just off the coast of Greece. Iran has warned the U.S. that if they try to apprehend the supertanker there, that it would be an extremely grave mistake. Because that would be interesting. I mean, all of the seizures so far that we have seen, or at least the main instigations, have been limited to the Persian Gulf. If Iran is able to push physical conflict, we've seen it to as far as Syria. If they can push it to the Mediterranean Sea, there's just no way the U.S. will be able to invade Iran if they can't handle
Mhm.
controlling these other areas outside of it. And so, I mean, this is really just Iran testing the water. But
Yeah.
Quite
but
literally.
Fox News did report, yeah, literally. And then Fox News had a special report yesterday and today saying that another boat has left the Arabian Sea, headed towards Syria around the Horn of Africa. So this is they're presuming to be it to be a Iranian boat with more crude oil or weapons for Syria. And so that, I mean, and the other thing, the reason why the U.S. Threatened Greece too, is because the EU sanctions, Greece being a member of the EU, disallow the sale of oil to Syria. So Greece would be facilitating sales is the logic.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Well, Greece can't get a leg up, you know.
I know.
Whether it's like Turkey violating their airspace dozens times per day to, America warning. Can you imagine like if Greece like decided to intervene and or buy Russian-made military weapons and like on the scale that Turkey is doing, like they would be reprimanded right away.
I mean, it's only a matter of time, and I think they're just waiting for the right moment when they see the weakness, smell the blood in the water, in order to start really making progress with the Russians. I mean, you've had growing warming relations between now and the past few years, ever since the economic crisis. Again, Germany, that's another country that's just steamrolling all over the Greeks, but I think they're waiting for the right moment to sort of switch poles, if you will.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean they're not really in a position, and they've had like the last 10 years or even more. But let's just focus on the last 10 years. A string of politicians that have always bent the knee, that have never really like have always obeyed what Brussels essentially had wanted, despite what their pre-election rhetoric might have been like. Um, so yeah, it's very unfortunate because they're going through like I understand things have improved slightly, but you know women were literally leaving their children on doorsteps in Greece.
I mean, up until recently, up until 3 months ago, you had a self-proclaimed hard-left communist government kissing the ring of neoliberals in Brussels. That's so even like their most fervent, like far left, or I like again, if Golden Dawn got in power, like I know some people on the dissident right really like to play with Golden Dawn, but I can only
Yeah,
imagine they would have done the same thing.
yeah, they're not gonna. Yeah, the Golden Dawn isn't gonna do anything.
Yeah, I'm not gonna get you too into the topic of the Greeks. I will be here all day.
Oh no.
All right.
But
The last bit of news I had was just Dick Cheney. Do you guys want to talk about Richard Cheney?
oh yeah, yeah.
Sure.
All right, so it's a little bit of news from left field, but what has been reported is that Dick Cheney will be attending next Monday's fundraiser for Trump's 2020 election campaign.
Oh,
Now, this is pretty significant. If you remember Dick Cheney, he was one of the Never Trumpers. Now you see Trump, sort of becoming a neocon. I think these sort of situations confirm it. So, according to the Post, which cited an invitation that it had obtained, the fundraiser in Jackson, Wyoming, will also include White House advisors Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner,
Our favorites.
yeah.
and they're listed as special guests.
Yeah,
Um,
what a cute couple. I love those two.
I know. The Trump's tweet, the most hardworking couples. I've never seen anyone work so hard. God.
Yeah, after he asked General Kelly to like quite literally throw them out of the White House because he didn't have the stomach to do it himself.
Yeah,
Get him out
so
of here! Get
yeah,
him out of here, John.
so yeah, Dick Cheney, Trump. I think this just sort of confirms a lot of our worst fears that Trump was just going to become another Republican. So
Yeah.
I think these sort of things just confirm that.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
at this point, I'm just holding out for Trump on rhetoric alone and some stuff with the courts. And pretty much, I can only see myself supporting him going into 2020 because even though he has kissed the ring to the establishment, even though he's really no better than what someone like a Marco Rubio, I will say at this point, he is still better than Clinton insofar as he's delayed a lot of what they wanted to happen. But seeing as he would have been really no better than any establishment Democrat or Republican, at the very least, he pisses off the right people and he raised the eyebrows also of the right people. So I can merely get behind him for that, but yes, this is disheartening to see. And I wasn't surprised at all. I think I've gone through my phase of disappointment with Trump, and at the beginning of this year, I think Venezuela was really the nail in the coffin, and then compounded on top of the Iran stuff, the failure to get out of Syria, capitulation on immigration issues, which there has been some mild success since, but nowhere near enough for my satisfaction. I think of many of his original supporters, but beyond that, like, he's hobnobbing around with Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney. I don't think that's the lesbian. I know Dick Cheney has a lesbian daughter, but I can't remember which one it was.
No,
Yeah,
dude,
to
we're
me-
gonna do the white striking fast. What are you talking about?
To me, Trump at this point reminds me of one of those MAGA, the MAGA protester that always dresses up with American colored Spartan armor.
Yeah, the one who had cuck on his breastplate with the Star of David.
Yeah, with the Star of David on his helmet and like a helmet from the 300. To me,
What a horrible person.
it's horrible to look at, but like he's absolutely triggering, the people we despise. So
Well, he's
Yeah,
also
is
triggering us. I think he's actually more of a message to the alt-right than he is to the anti.
but they still have this visceral. Their reactions though are more visceral than ours. So
Yeah, like
I don't know, man. If it wasn't for my Avi, I'd make some pretty angry faces.
yeah, but I think the general reaction to the right has just been point and laugh or roll their eyes, whereas on the left they were like outraged.
Yeah. I mean, they still literally think Russia is running the show. Trump, like even small things like Trump saying, I wonder even if Trump's suggesting that the G8 become the G7 become the G8 again and invite Russia is really just him playing games at this point. Like he knows very well making a statement like that is going to imply that he's still under the thumb of Putin and so on.
Oh yeah,
But who knows?
Vladov Putler, a tremendous progress out of all the things he manages to manipulate while not even be able to suppress protests in Moscow. He's a man of many mysteries.
Yeah.
But with that, do you want to get into the closing story, which is a bit wild, just some of the Italian stuff, just to end the show with?
Sure, go for it.
So after about a week of uncertainty, the ruling government in Italy has collapsed with the resignation of Prime Minister Conte after his address to the Senate. Now, the next moves will be decided by President Sergio Mattarella, who is a member himself of the center-left Democratic Party, who previously, in March 2018, tried to stifle the Five-Star Lega Coalition. Now, during Conte's speech, I read it, I didn't watch it, granted, with the mannerisms of the Italian people. Anything they do is going to seem passionate, even the most dispassionate things, but that's aside the point. He came off as very unhinged by some of the things I read. He criticized Salvini, calling him irresponsible, self-interested, criticized his use of religion in politics, and, of course, his ties to Russia, in which Salvini's response to his ties to Russia was this nice little picture right here. Now, I kid. He didn't actually pull out that picture, but you get the point. It's like Salvini isn't hiding the fact that he has a very positive opinion of the Russians and Putin. So this was no revelation, but this was one of my favorite. You guys won't be able to see this, but this was one of my favorite screenshots from the day. Just Salvini looking just so exasperated while Conte's putting his hand on his shoulder, like he's lecturing him. Sort of like it's like sitting there with your boss that you hate, which kind of accurate in that situation. But beyond that, Conte, he resigned and pretty much ended his speech with "the government ends here." Now, President Mattarella has requested that Conte stay in for a caretaker government, and the way it's going to go from now, I suppose I should mention in response to, in actual response to Conte's speech, Salvini said, look, despite everything that happened, if I could do it all over, would I do it again? Yes. Pretty much his outright words. And just the look on Salvini's face afterwards, if any of you are interested, I'll send a link to the Italian article I got this from the video clips, and they were acting as you would expect. It was the very boisterous behavior, and like, so it was hilarious. Then you have like Luigi Di Maio, the other deputy prime minister, like giving thumbs up to Conte. It made the modern state of U.S. politics look mild. So, granted, this also fun fact will be the 68th government. This upcoming government will be the 68th government since the end of World War II. To put that in perspective, we've had about, I think, 10 presidents since the end of World War II here in the U.S. I don't know how many prime ministers the UK has gone through. Look, I know parliamentary systems, they're more susceptible to having snap elections, but I think your average Italian prime minister has lasted about 2 years at this point. That's what I heard. I'm not sure how accurate that is. Now, the experts, the quote-unquote experts, are saying that Mattarella, the president, will install a caretaker government with the center-left Democrats and the Five Star Movement. Now, others are saying he will call a snap election, which will take place in October. If I had to take a guess at what I think is most likely is the president will cobble together some coalition. He will put somebody in charge, probably another figure from the Five Star, maybe even Di Maio himself, in charge of the country. Salvini will, of course, use this saying, look, they're trying to stifle our populism, because despite what the Western media will tell you, despite what the English-speaking media will tell you, populism is not dead in Italy, it's not dead in Austria, it's not dead in any of these places, despite some minor mishaps. Salvini will go on this, he'll do like he did with the Yellow Vest protests, and pretty much rally his troops, if you will. And just, I said this last week, if anything's going to happen, I think if there's a caretaker government, I think the demonstrations the Italian people will put on will put the Yellow Vest to shame. I think even if a caretaker government is formed, there will be no choice but to force a new election because of massive public outrage. That's the direction I see it going, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think Conte has pretty much set the stage for what's going to happen by his resignation. The truth is, Conte technically had the ability to get rid of Salvini, but of course didn't, and chose to himself leave. So that's what I mean. In a sense, he's already set the stage. He knows he can't go against Salvini. Salvini's popularity amongst the people is just far too strong. Conte is very much a wallflower at this point. He's not like Salvini has literally taken the stage.
He was never the superstar. He was always the guy in the background.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that has to happen now is that there isn't a coalition government that Salvini forms with that is the left of center, but left of center that's critical of the EU, because I think that that could really hamper whatever what he wants to achieve. So October, if we're going to have a snap election, I agree with you. I think that's probably when it's going to happen.
Yeah, like I said, I think they'll try the caretaker government, but I don't see it lasting.
Yeah.
I give it a year at tops.
Yeah.
I think it'll only be a few months, and to the point where they may be back at the polls again in March 2020. But point being is, a lot of people are concerned, and I would say understandably so, that Salvini, his days may be numbered, and that they may have bested him, and that they may have done a coup on him like they did in Austria. Granted, in Austria we have the, I believe, September elections to look forward to with what's coming up there. But again, that's irrelevant to this currently. But I think Salvini, just by his mere popularity, by his man of the people image, now I think that's more legitimate than most politicians, but of course it's never truly legitimate. I think he's got this in the bag. I think between him and coalition with, I would say even the FDI, the Brothers of Italy, I would say they got it. I mean, look, the center right is dead in terms of Berlusconi's party. No, Berlusconi has ruined the reputation of Forza Italia for generations to come. Five Star Conte's pretty much put a hole in the ship. Granted, maybe I mean Di Maio, he was somewhat like giving a thumbs up to the Lega, the pro Lega people in the Senate at the time, so he may be a more sympathetic figure. So we may get another 5-star Lega coalition just with leadership shuffle. Who knows? But I'm putting my money on uh, a new election is forced after a caretaker government falls apart, and probably it's going to be a coalition government between Lega and brothers, with Lega being the senior partner, and Salvini finally finding himself into the role of prime minister, in which he can go report back to Putin the fact that Moscow has taken Rome.
Oh, this is it's beautiful. The Red Menace, the actual Red Menace, right? So I mean, the truth is, Italy and Austria are two very different countries, and even if they came up with some kind of dirt on Salvini with ties to Russia, um, the Italians are just not going to care.
Yeah, I mean, look,
Right.
Italians are
And
used
Macron
to
can't
corruption.
wag his finger at him and expect him to just, okay, I won't run for election. um, it isn't going to happen. They're not going to care. Italy itself is in many ways like part of a different culture in Europe, and it won't affect it. I'm not in my opinion.
I don't see it affected at all. And just this picture I have up still on the screen, just him putting the hand on his shoulder. That's how I imagine the conversation going. It's like, no, Matteo, we can't have ties to Russia, and him just closing his eyes like. But I thought one of the most interesting criticisms out of all this was the fact that number one, the Russia thing, when Conte himself was at the forefront of wanting to improve relations with Russia, immediately turns tail the minute it becomes convenient. Number two, I think it's like he criticized him for like, oh, you know, we're a secular state. We can't go around using religion in politics. And it's like, come on, dude. Like, yes, you're in Italy. Look, this isn't Germany. This is not France. This is not Belgium, the Netherlands, the UK. If there's any place you can use religion in politics, it's Italy of all places, especially if you're a Catholic. Oh yeah, well, wow, that's really going to turn off the Italian voters. An openly Catholic politicians. What
Yeah.
Italian would ever support that? I can't even fathom it.
Yeah, can you imagine Conte Conte probably said something like this to Salvini: "You can't use a religion in the politics. You're making the Pope mad."
Yeah, they were he whispered several things to him, and like Salvini just like again as you can see on the screen had this face. You could tell it's like they've worked together long enough where they can still hold a conversation despite the fact that they probably hate each other's guts. That's what this looks like right now. And I would say, look, Salvini, it may have hit a few road bumps, may not have played out the way he wanted, but I say his gambit paid off.
Yeah, it did. It did in a big way, and you could tell that um, he's in a way he's been campaigning all this time. He's put himself out there. He's created his buzz. He's won the people's affection. He's played this beautifully. Like he's literally been doing a campaign without officially doing a campaign. His campaign was, in a way you could argue, was him doing his job. But that's actually what's given him strength.
Now, I've said this before, but I think we will get to the point, especially with how this is played out, where we will get a Salvini regime, if you will. I could see him being in power for, again, like up there with like Orban levels, where he's in there for like almost a decade, probably even more. I don't know. Maybe if we're stretching it, we can say Putin levels, granted the political situation in Russia and Italy. Not comparable at all, but point being is, I could see him being in power for years to come. Maybe a good comparison. Maybe he's the anti-Merkel, where he's in power for over a decade, almost 2 decades, but in terms of policy and behavior, is the complete opposite.
Yeah.
But that's all I have to say for this subject.
Yeah. I'm done with. I don't have anything else to add to the Italian elections or Salvini.
So, I suppose that closes out the war report, and I apologize for a little bit of a hiccup there. I hope it doesn't look too bad in the post-show editing. My very limited ability and my very limited resources to do that. At the very least, you'll get 2 episodes of the war report, one half and then another half. But if that's the case, okay. But I hope you guys enjoyed the show. We will see you next week, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
See ya.
guys.
Thank